In the end times, everything is going to turn topsy-turvy. When everything turns topsy-turvy, there is going to arise a breed of people that will be a mixed breed between evil spirits and human genes. That will be a breed. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the last days. There will be this breed. If you read Daniel chapter 2, when Nebuchadnezzar sees the statue, and then the scripture where it says the feet is like clay and iron. That will be like together, but they will not be together. And then it says there a small little word which all of us overlook. And he will mingle together with the sons of men. Who is the he that will mingle again? That goes back to the days of Noah, how the evil spirits mingled with the sons of men, and a different race, a different breed was produced on the earth. And during that breed, that particular group of people they introduce demon worship, demon sacrifice, and all kinds of witchcraft practices were introduced by those demons, by that breed. See, it's an angelic breed, fallen angels and humans joined together. They have special kind of wisdom. And they revealed all this to humankind, and they practice sacrificing their children to fire, sacrificing their children to Molech, sacrificing their children to Satan. A blood sacrifice. It all started not just in India, where there's so much of blood sacrifice been given, but from the days of Noah, when the human sacrifice was given to the demons. It all started from that day. When God destroyed the people of Noah's days through the flood, the flesh got killed, not the soul and the spirit. They live on. Because they lived on, that is why during the conquest of Canaan, you'll find that there were giants in the land. Where did those giants come from? I used to wonder, where did the giants come from? When all the giants were killed in the deluge, then where did these sons of Zumin come from? Goliath and his brothers, and all these Anakim. Sounds like a name from Star Wars. Anakim, this Kim, that Kim, several Kims, They are all the various giant race groups that were living during that time. Where did they come from? The soul lives on. And from those times till today, there is an intermingling taking place, which we are not aware of. But in the last days, this will escalate. This will escalate into a larger proportion. The Antichrist needs an army of that breed. He needs that. And that is why this group will be resurrected, or they will come back again on the scene. It will make the way for the intermingling of the seed of unrighteousness with the seed of righteousness. This will take place in the last days. And when this seed is there will be anarchy, great chaos, great mass killings taking place in great numbers. So how are we going to protect ourselves in the last days? Now there is a prophecy in the Bible that says, in the last days, the spade And the flesh hooks will all be turned into weapons of war. They will be all turned into weapons of war. So, in the end times, just like how God commanded Israel to kill their enemies for their survival, for their living in the land, God will need to give us new set of commandments. Version 3.0. This is not laughing matter, you know. This is very serious stuff that we are going to enter into. The days are already here. We are at the doorstep now. You know, I read about a pastor, a minister of God, an American minister, who went to London and he stood in the streets and preached against the gays. And a passerby who was a gay was so offended by his preaching because he boldly said a statement like this: the lifestyle of gay, homosexuality, is sin in the eyes of God. That man was so offended, he reported the minister to the police. The police came, arrested him, and he was put in prison one entire day, taken down all his statement, and then he was let free with a warning never to speak on such topics again. You see, such laws are already here at our doorstep. So what will we do? Keep mum about it? And I'm glad that Brother Bobby very forcefully last night spoke against it. How many of us will do that? Are we going to be a chicken? Those days are right at our doorstep. Those days are not very far into the future, you know, right at your doorstep.
Chuck Missler, you are such, in my opinion, and I'm entitled to say this, you are such a renowned, wonderful Bible teacher. Are you a little Miss Sugar? What are you talking about? UFOs, flying saucers? I don't get it.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the intended encouragement, but I really came at this whole subject because of my love for the Bible. It happens that I come out of an information science background. My whole career, 30 years in the strategic community, gives me perhaps a little different perspective than most people would have going at this topic. But I want to right up front indicate it was my biblical interest that brought me into this rather than my high-tech background, although that's proven to be, that and my Department of Defense connections have been very valuable to me. So that's one of the reasons I find myself in this peculiar posture.
But it's not, in other words, he has a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge from the intelligence community, which helps him put a lot together of what we'll be talking about. But he's saying it's his love for the Bible that is really motivating him right now. So you found a controversial verse in Genesis 6, which has to do with a prophecy that Jesus said.
I start with Jesus, and in Matthew 24, he gives 4 disciples an inside briefing on a second coming. And in that briefing, he makes a very strange remark. He says, as the days of Noah were, so shall the days of the coming of the Son of Man be. Now, many people presume he just meant that it was because of the business of usual. So anyway, the point is, we need to understand what the days of Noah were like in order to understand what he was saying. So that takes us to Genesis 6, and when you jump into Genesis 6, you quickly discover that very few seminaries teach what that passage really says. And so as you get into that Genesis 6, you have to understand the first 2 verses are one sentence. and it deals with this strange goings-on between the fallen angels producing hybrids with humans. And that was so uncomfortable in the early years of the church that it was the understanding of the early rabbis. It was also the understanding of the early church that what it was dealing with was fallen angels cohabiting with human women, producing a strange hybrid offspring. But when you get to about the 5th century, that was a very uncomfortable posture. So they cooked up this, what they call the lines of Seth argument, and that's what's taught in most seminaries. One of the things I discover is that many people who are seminary products of most seminaries haven't been taught that there are different perspectives of Genesis 6, and it's the literal, careful study version of Genesis 6 that starts to raise the fog on this whole issue.
Now tell me about the word Nephilim. What does that mean?
In the Hebrew, it comes from the verb nephal. It means the fallen ones, and that's the term used. Don't confuse that with the fallen angels. The fallen angels, according to Genesis 6, cohabited with human women to produce a hybrid offspring that are called in the Hebrew the Nephilim. In the Septuagint version of the Old Testament, the translation of the Old Testament into Greek, they use the word gigantes, which is transliterated giants, right. And they did happen to be giants, but that's not what the word means. The word actually means, in the Greek, the earthborn. And so, from the Greek point of view, they're earthborn, and from the Hebrew point of view, they're the fallen ones, but either way, they're pointing to a hybrid, and it apparently was part of Satan's plan to contaminate the Messianic line.
But so the purpose of the flood was to get rid of these.
Exactly.
People.
That's exactly the point. You study verse 9 of Genesis 6. It speaks of Noah that his genealogy was untainted, unblemished, and apparently it was a distinctive in that sense. He may not have been the only one unblemished, but the fact that he was unblemished qualified him for what God was going to do, among other things. But the point is, the whole issue that God chose to do was to save 8 people in the ark and erase the blackboard, so to speak. Okay,
but if the blackboard was erased, then we don't have to fool with them today, if they were all destroyed.
Except Genesis 6 verse 4 says there were Nephilim in the land in those days, comma, and also after that. And we discover, many good Bible scholars miss this, that you really won't understand subsequent events in the Old Testament by not realizing it happened again. When God in Genesis 15 and Genesis 17 confirms the land covenant to Abraham, he tells Abraham that he and his descendants are going to be away for 400 years, but after 400 years, they're going to return. That gave Satan, who's obviously listening, the realization that he had 4 centuries to lay down a minefield. And that's why when Moses enters the land and he sends his at Kadesh Barnea, he sends in the 12 reconnoiters, if I can call them that. They come back and say, and Numbers 13, verse 33 says they were Nephilim in the land. So it happened again.
I'll tell you what, hold that thought. Did you know that 12 astronauts have reported UFOs? Don't go away, we'll be right back. Hello, Sid Roth here with Chuck Missler. And Chuck, so many astronauts are reporting UFOs, but one was amazing. This one astronaut, John Blaha, a ham radio operator, actually picked up what he was saying. As a matter of fact, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Let's take a look at that now.
The wording is as follows. Houston, this is Discovery. We still have the alien spacecraft under observance.
I have a question for you. Why is there so much misinformation? Why are there so many cover-ups? I mean, when astronauts are reporting UFOs, what is the reason, in your opinion, for the misinformation, the cover-up?
I would be conjecturing, like most people, one of the great mysteries in this whole area is why the cover-ups by all the governments, but most by the United States. Other countries are starting to release those information, but in the United States, there is a deliberate attempt to hide this area, and that's probably the biggest mystery. Isn't this one? The biggest one is Roswell. Why is the Roswell incident back in 1947 enjoy a higher level of classification than our most sensitive warheads?
You're from the intelligence community. You should tell me. Well, it makes no sense. I agree.
And it's a mystery. I don't have a conjecture as to why they're doing it, but it's clear 2 presidents and 4 congressmen have been unable to crack the security that surrounds the Roswell incident. Why? That was 60 years ago. And that's the mystery. Obviously, there's all kinds of bizarre stories that have come out of that experience. But the real mystery to me isn't that. The real mystery is, why is it classified? Why does the government hide it? And I don't have any conjectures. I think those conjectures are just as wild as the other conjectures about the UFOs.
According to your tapes, this cover-up is very unusual because some 30 newspapers reported it in 47, and then just immediately after, what happened?
Yeah, Blanchard, the colonel of the base, when the Roswell thing first happened, issued a press release that a saucer had landed and so forth. Within a few hours, 400 miles away, the Brigadier General in charge of the 8th Air Force countermanded that press release and hatched this story about it was a weather balloon and so forth. That starts a whole series of the silliest, most inane cover-up stories. There's been a sequence of them. First it was a weather balloon. Well, that didn't fly. They went one after the other. And to the community, it's almost insulting because the cover-up stories are so empty, so foolish, so ridiculous.
But what about that new technique, digital imaging?
Yeah, it's interesting that when Brigadier General Ramey made his press release countermanding Blanchard's, the press took pictures. Many years later, just a few years ago, a guy by the name of Johnson, who took the picture, we were able to get the negatives, and by using advanced digital analysis of the negatives, they were able, an analyst by the name of Rudiak was able to use advanced information techniques to unravel some words that were on the memo that was in Ramey's hand. And it speaks of the victims and the disc that crashed. In other words, this
actually calls it not a plane, a disc.
A disc that crashed, and there are victims, implying. See, the stories have always said there were 4 bodies, 3 were dead, 1 was still alive. That was the unconfirmed rumors that we heard. Well, it turns out that memo, that unraveling, is regarded as the smoking gun because it demonstrates that the Air Force has been lying all along.
Well, these UFOs, they defy laws of physics. Your degree is in physics,
yes,
I believe.
Well, yes. The thing that is the fundamentals, we want to get right at that. I'm sorry, presuming a lot here on your audience. The UFOs have 2 problems. The one problem is they are tangible. They show up on multiple radars. They leave physical evidence, burnt ground and radioactivity and so forth. So they're tangible. They're not hallucinations. Radar sets don't have hallucinations. Okay.
Right.
On the other hand, they make right-angle turns at exotic speeds. They go faster than the speed of sound without sonic booms. They do things that seem to violate physical laws, and yet they are physical in one sense, and yet they're not physical in another. Now, the other area we need to just acknowledge is this is the toughest area to research because not only because of all the hoaxes and all the crackpots that are in this area, is because of the deliberate disinformation by the government trying to hide these areas. But the net reality is Jacques Vallée, the Frenchman, and J. Allen Hynek, the American, are probably the 2 most of the early pioneers, the 2 most reputable researchers. They both came to the conclusion that these things are hyperdimensional. They're not extragalactical. That's a very fundamental insight, by the way, because they seem to pose to being something that they're not. But the real point is that we're dealing here with a phenomenon that bridges the physical reality we understand and a reality that's outside that. One of the things we've discovered just in the last few years is that some of the constants of physics are changing that we thought were constant. And Scientific American, in June of 2005, ran an article in which they pointed out if the constants of physics are changing, that implies that our physical reality is actually a subset, a shadow of a larger reality. And when you start dealing in the UFO area, that's one of the other demonstrations that there is a hyperdimensional aspect to this.
And you actually, from your research, believe that some of the people that report they've been abducted is actually true.
That is the spookiest side of this whole area, and probably the classic author in this area is Dr. John Mack, head of psychiatry for Harvard Hospital. He's written a book on this whole area. Clearly, and there was a conference at MIT on this whole subject. There are enormous numbers of people. Some estimates are between over 1% of the population, maybe as high as 2 or 3%, claim to have had an experience which involves being abducted by these vehicles or whatever. And now their stories are too bizarre to accept on the one hand. On the other hand, when you profile these people, they're above average intelligence, no prior psychiatric history, clearly subject to some serious trauma, and not anxious. They're almost trying to hide the stories rather than reveal them.
And their stories are similar. That's the thing that's so amazing.
They're united by some common threads. In fact, that was Mack's challenge to the conference at MIT. He says, if what these people say is happening isn't happening, what is happening? Because these stories all have common links that are spooky.
I'll tell you what, hold that thought. When we come back, we're going to talk about how these UFOs tie in with end times. The only reason you're involved in this is it's a missing ingredient, a missing piece, something that no one looks at in the end times, these UFOs. Are these people around today, in your opinion, these descendants of the Nephilim?
I wouldn't be a bit surprised. Well, not necessarily as descendants directly, because I think that's been dealt with. But I think there's, but at the same time, I do suspect that the UFOs are in effect a modern day echo, if you will, and that may be what Jesus was talking about when he says, "As the days of Noah were." That there's he's implying a parallelism, and so that's why we got interested in this in the first place. And if that's true, we can test. Is that we're dealing here with something that's not the seed of men, namely Nephilim, hybrids. And that's a hint there that there will be a proliferation of hybrids at the end times, because that's what Daniel's talking about. So that's a staggering verse to deal with.
You know, one of the fascinating things I find in your 2 CDs that we're making available is you talk about Joshua's assignment to destroy all the people in particular areas that a lot of people wonder about.
Yeah, when you read that as a New Testament reader, you're shocked, because God tells Joshua to wipe out every man, woman, and child of 4 key tribes. And that shocks, the New Testament reader, because we don't understand that there is a gene pool problem again. We understand Genesis 6, the flood of Noah, was dealing, among other things, with a gene pool problem in the human predicament. What we don't realize is that Satan had again laid down a minefield in Canaan, because when he found out from God's revelation to Abraham that his descendants would be away and then return after 400 years, that gave Satan 400 years to lay down a minefield. When you study the book of Judges geographically, you discover that they didn't follow through in certain areas to wipe out their instructions. The places they missed was a place called Bashan. We call that the Golan Heights today. There's other areas, the central part, that we would call Judea and Samaria, but now it's called the West Bank. And there's the third area, a place called Gaza. And you stand back for that and you realize those areas where they failed to follow through in the book of Judges are the same areas that are under dispute today. And you begin to realize that there's a demon overlay on human history here that we need to understand.
Now that's my next question. In your opinion, are we talking about aliens from foreign planets, or are we talking about demons?
Well, first of all, I don't believe that even J. Allen Hyde and Jacques Vallée concluded they're not intergalactical for a number of good physical reasons. We believe they're hyperdimensional, they're demonic. They also pretend to be something they're not. That means that one of their tools is deceptions. And so that gives us a perspective of where they stand biblically. I believe that they are real today and that they are demonic in their root purpose. And so that creates a danger to anyone that isn't tutored in this area. And that's one reason that we include it in our materials in terms of our own spiritual hygiene. So,
well, there were over a dozen astronauts that have reported to UFOs, and one astronaut in particular, his name is Dr. Edgar Mitchell. Mm-hmm. He's appealing that the files be open. Let's take a look at that.
Okay.
And what I am suggesting, it is now time to put away this embargo of truth about the alien presence. And I call upon our government to open up like other governments have, and you will hear about that this morning, like the Belgians have, the French have, the Brazilians have, the Argentines, the Mexicans have all released their files. It's about time now that we do the same thing and become a part of this planetary community.
That is so amazing to me, Chuck. Are we going to open up our files or not?
And the very fact there's resistance is alarming. You think that there's nothing to hide, they would open it up. So the question that really, you can only speculate, you only feed speculation the way they're operating, keeping it secret.
Okay, former President Reagan, you were telling me about an amazing, amazing statement he made about UFOs.
Well, that they may be the ingredient that it may take to get the world together. But on the presidential side, there have been 2 presidents that have tried to crack the security and couldn't, and 4 congressmen. So we need to put pressure.
So what is going to happen when the President of the United States says there are UFOs, we're being invaded, there's going to be a one-world government, and, I mean, there we are, end-time prophecy.
It looks like it's very easy to see how this could have a major role in setting the stage if we understand the classical biblical scenario. And that's one reason when you go at this area, your primary study should be to understand what the Bible has said all along is the destiny of man and the history, the forward history of governments. And so as we watch every day, that as we look at our newspaper and see where the world is going, not just in this area, the whole geopolitical horizon is converging. The more you know about your Bible, and the more you know about what's really going on in the geopolitical horizon, the more you see the convergence. We're plunging in to the climax of human.
Would you like to know what it says about the 112th Pope? I'll tell you one thing. It says he will be the Pope for the final judgment. I feel that what you're about ready to hear will change your paradigm for end times forever. For instance, they investigated secret files from the Vatican that shows that the Vatican has been in communication and been researching aliens from other planets that strongly affect your whole understanding of the last days. And you stated, you predicted that in March of 2012, the Pope would resign for health reasons, and let's be candid, they missed it. Did you?
Well, at first, actually, we thought we might have. Now we learned that, in fact, we did not. We made a prediction that Benedict would retire in either March or April of 2012, citing health reasons. When that date came and went and no activity had transpired, we moved to the second part in our prediction, which we also made in 2012, that at a minimum he would retire before the end of 2013. Now we've learned, by the way, from the editor of the El Observatorio Romano, which is the Vatican's owned official media outlet, that in fact Pope Benedict officially resigned at the end of March 2012 privately to a handful of cardinals who held it in a strict reserve, in a confidence. It couldn't be told even to other cardinals. This happened last year. He made it official in 2013, so in a very supernatural, dramatic way, we were actually right in both instances.
Well, the prophecy of the popes was allegedly given to Saint Malachi Morgare, an Irish saint, in 1139 A.D. Now, the way that this story is told, Malachi made a pilgrimage to Rome to see the Pope, and right outside of the city of Rome, he had a vision of all the popes up until the tribulation period. So he wrote down a series of short Latin phrases for 112 popes, except the last one, which is quite a bit more detailed. The last prophecy, the prophecy for the very next pope, says, "In the extreme persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, who will nurse the sheep in many tribulations. When they are finished, the city of Seven Hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people." It's the last one on Malachi's list, and I just cited the prediction for this pope. It says, in the extreme persecution, the tribulation, the dreadful judge will judge the people. So it really does sound like the end times, and it matches the book of Revelation in some pretty compelling ways in chapter 17, which also speaks of a seven-hilled city. Well, the records in the Vatican go back centuries. Actually, I wrote 2 chapters of history concerning the Vatican's interest in extraterrestrials. They have a whole theology developed around what they call the principle of plenitude, meaning anything that God could do, he would do. So they consider the existence of aliens an inevitable consequence of God's omnipotence.
Now, you've actually researched with Vatican astronomers. What did they tell you?
Yeah, it's extraordinary. We even had the opportunity to go to Mount Graham in Arizona, which is where their Vatican Astronomical Technology Telescope, called that, where it's at, where the Vatican's astronomers study the deep space. And in the course of doing that, getting permission through the Arizona State University to go there to meet with their astronomers, the Jesuits who are there, we also got access to top astronomers that work in Rome, including an astronomer by the name of Guy Cosmonalgo. He's one of the top astronomers for the Vatican.
What was the major thing you got from that interview with him?
Oh, well, 2 major things. One, he says without apology that very soon the nations of the world are going to look to the aliens for their salvation. Want to find out where are they coming from. So he agreed to be interviewed 5 times from Rome, and then gave us documents which are not available to the public that outline what much of the inner thinking of the highest level theologians and astronomers at the Vatican believe now, including the idea that Jesus might be the son of a star child. Now, when we ask him what is a star child, right, they're talking about an alien intelligence from another world, and that the birth of Jesus Christ, the virgin birth, was in fact comparable to an abduction scenario in which these aliens used the Virgin Mary to create Jesus. And this is one of the ways in which they're combining the idea that we are soon to be visited by an alien savior from another world.
Well, up on top of Mount Graham in Arizona, there's an observatory complex that consists of 3 very high-powered telescopes. One is the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope. There's a radio telescope, and then there's one called the Large Binocular Telescope. This is the most powerful telescope in the world. In fact, they told us they can get better images of space than the Hubble Space Telescope can. Now, attached to this telescope is an infrared camera named Lucifer, which is really a kind of an odd name for a camera. And from the information that we gathered, this thing was named by the Max Planck Institute and some German astronomers. But the Vatican is part of this conglomerate up there, and they're all working together. Now, what this instrument's used for is astrobiology, for looking for exoplanets, looking for other worlds. And the infrared spectrum is also very useful for seeing things that can't be seen with the naked eye. And many UFO researchers have noted that you can see a lot of ships and entities that you normally can't see.
Well, first of all, the day that we spent on Mount Graham, the entire day there, we had the Jesuits speaking to us face to face. We also had systems engineers. It was astonishing, the access that they gave us. And one of the things we found amazing in the use of the Lucifer device and even the other telescopes is how commonly the astronomers spoke of UFOs. We were just taken back by the fact that it was almost a nuisance to them that there are so many. And so the phenomenon, to me, is certainly real. Then, of course, you begin defining what it is. Well, to the Vatican and to the astronomers...
But wait a second, it's demonic. Why would the Vatican be studying this?
Yeah, well... Not only are they studying it, Corrado Balducci, who was the spokesman for the Vatican, he was their official mouthpiece concerning the alien presence, not just the reality of aliens on other worlds, but an alien presence that is here on Earth now. You can go to YouTube and watch his shows on Italian television when he spoke for the church and said that the church was using its embassies around the world to compile information, a case study, if you will, on what the aliens are doing on Earth now. So the belief system is deep, regardless of what you or I might make out of it. And I got to tell you, especially when it comes to alien abduction, I am convinced that we are talking about demonic activity, not intelligences from another world, maybe from another dimension. What they're saying to us now is it's going to affect Christian belief. There is a professor for the Pope's university in Rome, and he is a very highly respected intellectual. His last name is Tanzaniti. And he has written a paper now in which he is saying that very soon, not right in the beginning, we won't have to deny our Christian faith in the beginning. But there is information coming from another world, and once it is confirmed, it is going to require a rereading of the gospel as we know it. And that's the kind of information that we are receiving from the highest levels of Vatican intelligentsia.
Where's this headed, in your opinion, after all this research?
I think it's headed towards an imminent great deception. I think they either know something or they suspect something, and that's why they're preparing the Catholic faithful. And of course, the Vatican has reached beyond Catholics, but they're trying to prepare the world. Well, the idea among both Catholics and Protestant scholars is that he will be the final pope. He is the one who is going to be residing over the Vatican as it enters into the Great Tribulation period. And there's also the belief, among even some of the Catholic mystics, that he might be a false pope, an anti-pope, somebody who helps give rise to the Antichrist.
Let me tell you something. Judaism, Christianity, and other religions have focused on the year 2012. You know, remember the Mayan prediction, the end of the world in 2012? So everyone's discounted all of that, but that's not exactly what the prediction said. What did it say?
In the conferences where I spoke last year, I kept telling people, don't say it's the end of the world. That's not what the Maya said. That's not what the Aztecs said. That's not what the Cherokee Indians said, all of whose calendar rolled over at the end of 2012. What was it that they were saying? They were saying 2012 was the end of an era, and 2013 marks a new dispensation. Now, the Maya said some things that were very interesting. They said it would be marked by the emergence of two great male figures who would emerge upon the earth. They sound very much like they're talking about the false prophet and the Antichrist. They talked about their god Bolyon Yakteku, the spirit of it, coming up from out of the underworld. Now, what does this god do? He guards the bones and the seed of the giants that are in the underworld, and that spirit would begin to rise in the year 2013, giving birth even to a new form of humanity.
You're talking about what I've read about and pondered so many times in the Bible. Maybe you've read this about the Nephilim, where the sons of God cohabited with the daughters of humans and produced great giants. That's what it sounds like to me.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. And furthermore, turn-of-the-century preachers, including Jonathan Edwards, marked the year 2012 to 2016 as the date when the false prophet and the Antichrist would appear. Dozens of Protestant reformers marked these years hundreds of years ago. Not only that, and you appreciate this with your Jewish ministries, the Zohar. one of the most important books of Jewish Kabbalah ever written.
It is accepted in traditional Judaism as coming from God. It's not all from God, I can tell you as a fact, but it's an interesting situation that it talks about.
In a section of the Zohar called Signs Heralding Mashiach, the Coming of the Messiah, they marked the year 5773, which in the Jewish calendar began in September 2012 and comes through into this year 2013, and said that was the time. In fact, much of the prophecy sounds almost identical to the prophecy of the popes. It is a time that will lead to the destruction of Rome, and more importantly, they said, at that time Messiah will begin making himself known to the nations of the world. This 700 years ago prophesied that between 2012 to 2013, the emergence of the Messiah would appear on earth. Almost an identical parallel to cultures around the world that for thousands of years saw these dates specifically as the time when the end times would begin.
Well, what happened in Fatima, Portugal in 1917 was really just that, in my opinion. Now, up to 70,000 people gathered in a field, supposedly to see an apparition of the Virgin Mary. But if you go and read the descriptions of what people call the miracle of the sun, they actually describe seeing a gray silvery disc rotating around in the sky and kind of putting a cascade of colors, like a rainbow of colors. And so it really, in 1917, no one had vocabulary of words like flying saucer.
But there are secret plans for welcoming. The Vatican will welcome in this alien from another planet as God,
which is what Paul calls Satan in Ephesians chapter 2. Now, the demonic realm in the New Testament worldview was the atmosphere above the earth.
Vatican experts have told us when Father Malachi Martin was asked, why is the Vatican, why do they have a presence on Mount Graham? And one of the things we haven't had time to talk about is Mount Graham is sacred to the Apache. It is a stargate through which they've, for centuries, have seen creatures that come, that move back and forth.
Now, this is right in Arizona.
This is in Arizona. And in fact, their creation mythos is that a disc came down and a bearded guy in the disc, who was the father of creation, was what established Mount Graham as a holy mountain. Well, anyway, when Malachi Martin was asked, why is the Vatican on Mount Graham? What are they doing up there? He said that they're using their telescope to watch something. And when he was pressed on the question, he said it's because at the highest levels of the Vatican governance, they know what is approaching the earth, and it will be of the utmost importance in coming years. They're literally watching something with the Lucifer device that is approaching planet Earth.
And what do you believe they're looking for?
I think that they could be deceived. I think they're watching something and they think it's one thing, and I think it's something else. Lucifer, I think it's Satan. I think Jesus said, I beheld Satan as lightning falling from heaven. He has to do with the power of the air. And of course, you know, when Pope Benedict stepped down not long ago, twice lightning struck the top of the St. Peter's Basilica. And this goes back to their belief system. In Romanism, the belief was that the God would tell you when somebody should step down and when a new king should be elected. It was called augurism, and it's where we take the word inaugural or inauguralism for the placement of a new king.
We intend to provide files, images, over 20 hours of audio interviews with leading experts, private PDFs sent to us from Vatican astronomers, even video that will more than suggest that Rome is paving the way for the imminent, widespread acceptance of an alien savior, and there's reasons why they are doing that is beyond their control. They also believe it's going to lead the masses to believe that God's going to use these extraterrestrials in a way that he used them once before. In other words, they're interpreting them like we would think of as angels, as his agents in creation. And according to the Vatican's top theologians, this is going to be presented in a way that it does not immediately require us to explicitly renounce our faith in God, but it is going to require radical reinterpretation of Christianity as somehow this information is presented. It's also going to be useful for establishing a global system and religion, another goal the Vatican has emphasized lately, or as one of our consultants wrote, the ripple effect is going to eliminate discernible obstacles to articulating a global religion that honors the cosmologies of all as they are under the reality of an extraterrestrial influence, end quote.
I feel like the little kid in the back of the classroom, kind of diminutive, raising my hand, Mr. Horn. Just to be clear here, we are facing what I guess the only way I describe it would be a massive deception that's being planned. Is that a fair statement? I guess. In other words, what the people of the world are about to see, about to witness, is a false coming, perhaps, or a false second coming, or is that too simplistic of an explanation?
Well, no. That's absolutely what we're talking about. It will be part of the...
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Tom. I didn't mean to talk over you. It's part of the Great Deception. The word Antichrist means in place of. It doesn't mean against. So the bottom line is what the Vatican's doing is shoehorning the idea that, number one, the aliens can be redeemed, and number two, they're going to spring at the right moment. The fact that God is an alien power, that Jesus was either a genetically altered super alien that came to save us, and that's the ultimate deception, Jug. It's not a false rapture or anything. It is basically the total deception. Jesus made it easy when he said this: "I came and you received me not. Another will come claiming to be me. Him you will receive." So it's going to be in place of, not out of place. In other words, they're going to substitute the alien God, and people are going to be deceived by it. Is that accurate, Tom?
That's accurate, and furthermore, you can, if people want to Google this stuff, just type in Funis' name, type in our space brother, read what the Vatican is openly saying through its mouthpieces right now, in which they're saying that not only do aliens exist, but they might be closer to God than we are, morally superior to us, and they will be coming here to evangelize us, to show us a better way. That's the reason why the Vatican's top theologians are saying that we won't immediately have to renounce our faith in God, but once we understand the gospel as they do, since they're closer to God than we are, we fell, they didn't, they're morally superior to us, they're going to show us a better way, a clearer way, and they're going to be led by some type of a leader who will, I guess, be held up as the Savior persona. There's a doctrine we won't go into, but it's called many Christs, and this is very popular to the Vatican's astrobiologists right now. The idea that Christ might have been manifested in many ways on many different worlds to all kinds of intelligence. Those who haven't fallen have remained fully in His grace. They're not fallen like we are. They're unfallen. They're superior to us morally and spiritually, and they're the evangelists that are coming to the earth to show us poor, dumb, stupid, lost earthlings a better way to get to God, and they'll be doing that through their champion. That's exactly what they are saying, and it isn't just the documents we've received or the interviews that we've done. You can Google this and read this stuff for yourself. It's exactly what they're saying. So
Mr.
it is
Horn.
a great deception, and it is imminent.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You can just look today at Fox News. Tom Cruise, there's a headline, Tom Cruise thinks he's on a planet to fight aliens, according to his book, where he says that the aliens are going to come to protect humanity from those who are bent on destroying this planet. I mean, that's just from a headline from today.
We know this, first of all, that they existed. There would be evidence of them that they existed. We also are increasingly of the persuasion that they exist on Earth now. I'm talking about living and breathing.
Yes.
And furthermore, we know, if you believe the Bible, if you're a biblical literalist like I am, we know that the Bible predicted that at the end times, this would be one of the signs of the times, the return on earth of the Nephilim. The ancient Hebrews that translated the Septuagint into Greek understood that the prophet Isaiah, in chapters 13 and 14 of Isaiah, that he was predicting the return of the giants with monsters, of the destruction of Babylon, which is something to still happen in the final age. And you and I have quoted and talked about that verse before, Isaiah 13. Open the gates, ye ruler, I give command, and I bring them. Giants are coming to fulfill my wrath. The 16th chapter of the book of Enoch writes of the deceased offspring of the Watchers, the spirit of the giants, the Nephilim, as being released at the end of time to bring slaughter and destruction upon man. This comes to pass as part of God's day of the Lord, or his great tribulation, when Satan and his angels punish the unbelieving world before they are resigned to the pit. And that particular prophecy mirrors Isaiah. It mirrors the apocryphal works that indicate there would be a future date in which watchers will rise for judgment, but the spirits of their giant are going to be remanifested upon earth to wreak havoc upon the earth. The book of Jubilees, an ancient Jewish religious work, talks about this. What other texts? And it's a gold mine of what he and the Vatican are considering regarding the ramifications of astrobiology, specifically the disclosure of advanced extraterrestrial life. We are, by the way, also going to make that PDF available for free. But in it, he talks about how societies are going to look to the aliens soon to be the saviors of humankind. And then to illustrate that, the theological soundness of that possibility, he argues what I was talking to Steve about a moment ago, that humans are not the only intelligent beings that God's created. Non-human life forms, he says, are described in the Bible. And then to illustrate the kind of aliens that we're going to be in contact with, he references the Nephilim. And we will provide all of his quotes, everything that he said. But you have to ask yourself, just really, where are these people coming from? Especially when they start talking about Jesus being the potential child of another race, which is alien abduction by any other way of thinking about it. The bottom line is there are Vatican scholars, not all of them, but the ones we talk to that are dealing with astrobiology, that believe that Jesus may have been the star child of an alien race, that the virgin birth in reality might have been an alien abduction. Now, they might not use that language, but all you have to do is read what they're saying. That's exactly what they're saying. She was impregnated by E.T. She gave birth to a hybrid Jesus. The star base, as the local Indians call it on Mount Graham, includes Dr. Christopher Corbally, the vice director for the Vatican Observatory Research Group on Mount Graham, up through this last year, up through 2012. He says that our image of God is going to have to change when disclosure of alien life is made and confirmed by scientists, including the need to evolve from the concept of an anthropocentric God into a broader entity, meaning the earth is not special, humans are not special, there's intelligent life all over the universe, some of them morally superior to us, and God is the broad entity that created all of them, and they're going to come here. They are going to teach us a better way. Vatican Observatory Director Father Jose Funes. He's also been in the news. You can Google this stuff where he's talking about our brother, but he says that they are going to confirm the true faith of Christianity and the dominion of Rome. In fact, when the El Observatorio Romano, which is a Vatican-owned newspaper, doesn't publish anything that the Vatican doesn't prove, when they asked him what he meant by that, he said, how can we rule out that life has developed elsewhere? And just as we consider earthly creatures as brothers and sisters, we would consider them as extraterrestrial brothers. They're part of creation. And believing in the existence of such is not a contradiction to Catholic doctrine. In other words, definitely going to be a contradiction to guys like Tom Horn, Steve Quayle, probably Doug and Joe Hagman, but not the Catholic doctrine. So they really are positioning themselves to be the answer source for the world's religious communities when official disclosure is made. Now, they're either putting themselves in that position because they know something we don't know, or they're putting themselves in that position because they suspect something that we don't know.
So that they can get the sense that there is a clock that is ticking down, and that biblically it's true, but even cultures outside of the Bible understand that we're living at a period of time, an accelerated time, where things are occurring now. And isn't it astonishing? Isn't this astonishing? That at a time when biotech can now repeat a science that was only maybe performed once before by the Watchers who brought the world to who caused the world to ultimately wind up at the flood, that we have invaded Iraq and potentially will Iran at a time when biotech is capable of doing what the Watchers did. We went into the home of the Tower of Babel, which is related to Nimrod, and in the first show that we did, we also connected those dots there, that this may be the only place on the face of the earth where the Bible actually identified a location of a stargate. We went there. We're not exactly sure what our interest is in being there, but Isaiah the prophet says this concerning this is, by the way, from the Greek Septuagint, so I hope it's okay to quote from that. Isaiah 13:1-3 says, "The vision which Isaiah son of Amos saw against Babylon, Iraq, or the location of Iraq, lift up a standard on the mountain of the plain, exalt the voice to them, beckon with the hand." Now listen to what he says. "Open the gates, ye ruler. I give command, and I bring them. Giants are coming to fulfill my wrath." Now, this is a prophecy about the end time. Babylon is going to be destroyed, and at a time when it's being destroyed, God orders, it's almost like when he sends the great angels down, in the book of Revelation to have a key to a pit. He orders somebody, a ruler, to open a gateway through which, this literally says the Geborim in the Hebrew, that he brings back the Geborim to fulfill his wrath at the end of times. And it's at a time when Babylon is being invaded and destroyed. So on every level, when you look at what's transpiring in the Middle East, when you look at what's transpiring in science, when you look at much of the indication that we are probably moving toward a time of official disclosure of alien technology. And even some of the world's greatest religious organizations are preparing their people by writing theological essays and books that this will not challenge our orthodoxy, that the church is going to be okay.
Well, how much of a coincidence can it be that our Middle East headquarters is in Baghdad, which is like 60 miles north of old Babylon?
Right.
Rather an interesting coincidence.
Well, and the New York Times ran an article recently in which they were discussing how that the U.S. government and the Baghdad government and the United Nations are entertaining an idea to turn Babylon, ancient Babylon, into an international cultural center, to invest billions of dollars into it, to turn it into an international cultural center, to essentially rebuild it. So in terms of prophecy, no matter which direction you look at this, you could interpret the bits and pieces in different ways, but we're living in various prophetic times.
And when John wrote that a star fell from heaven and opened a bottomless pit, and out of it came locusts to go and torture men for 5 months, we and earlier generations could not understand or comprehend what he was talking about. But this idea of gates, this idea of the Watchers coming back and plaguing the earth during the tribulation period, it makes a lot of sense.
Well, J.R., I have to just quickly react. One of the creatures that comes up is called Apollyon. That would be the ancient god worshipped by the Greeks.
That's right, Apollo.
Apollo.
That's exactly right. And there are records that directly say Apollo is Apollyon in ancient records, and not all, and these outside of the Scripture that identify him as such. And notice that those beings are transgenics. They're mutated. They're mixtures of various kinds of animals. And when you follow Isaiah's prophecy all the way through to the end of that chapter, he talks about how Babylon will be occupied by satyrs and mythological creatures and monsters and